The night air carried the scent of blood. Familiar. But there was something else. Something feral. I stood atop the crumbling battlements of my castle, the wind whipping through my hair, bringing with it that unmistakable, rancid stench of wet fur and decay. They were close. Closer than I'd allowed any beast to get in centuries. Werewolves. Their howls pierced the stillness, long and mournful like a dirge for the dead, and they came in numbers. Good. The ground trembled as the first of them emerged from the tree line, their eyes glowing an eerie crimson, fangs bared, claws digging into the earth as they surged forward. They moved with a fluid, terrifying grace, muscles rippling beneath mangy fur. I leapt from the battlements, landing in the center of the courtyard, the impact sending a small cloud of dust into the air. The beasts paused, their eyes narrowing, sizing me up. Let them come. The first beast broke through the tree line, a massive, fur-covered monstrosity with claws that glistened like knives in the moonlight. It was almost beautiful in its savagery, its lips curled back in a snarl that revealed rows of blood-stained fangs. It barreled toward me with all the subtlety of an avalanche. I didn't move until the last second, then stepped to the side, feeling the rush of wind as its claws slashed the air where my throat had been. I grabbed it by the scruff, feeling the muscles tense beneath its fur, and drove my fist into its stomach. It doubled over, a pained wheeze escaping its throat, and I wasted no time. I twisted its neck sharply, hearing the vertebrae crack. But I didn't stop there. I yanked its still twitching body into the air with one arm and swung it like a club, the weight of it driving into the side of another werewolf that had lunged at me. The impact was bone-shattering. I felt the ribs cave beneath the force, heard the wet, muffled crunch as the beast's head collided with its comrade. Blood sprayed in all directions, painting the ground a dark, glistening red. They tried to swarm me, thinking that their numbers would overwhelm, that they would drown me in a sea of fur and fangs. But I had faced worse. Much worse. One of them came at me from the side, its jaws wide, teeth gleaming. I let it come, watched as it leaped, and caught it midair by the snout. It thrashed, claws flailing wildly, tearing into my arms, leaving deep furrows of blood in their wake. I twisted, ripping the jaws apart with a sickening wet tear, the flesh splitting down the middle, the beast's scream dying in its throat as I tore its head in half. The next tried to pounce on my back, thinking it could sink its fangs into my neck. I slammed my elbow into its snout, hearing the satisfying crunch of bone, then grabbed it by the leg, swung it overhead, and slammed it into the ground with all my strength. The impact shattered its skull against the cobblestones, brains and blood splattering across the ground in a grotesque display. The werewolves hesitated now, circling me, their eyes wary. They had come to kill me, but they had not expected this. I grinned, baring my fangs. "Is this all you have?" I taunted, letting the words drip with contempt. I thought werewolves were supposed to be predators. They charged again, driven more by anger than strategy. I met them head on. One lunged for my throat, and I caught it mid-leap, using its momentum to drive it into the ground. I pressed down, my fingers digging into its throat until I felt the windpipe give. It writhed beneath me, claws scrabbling at my arms, but I tore its throat out in one clean motion, blood pouring from the gaping wound. Another tackled me from the side, its jaws snapping shut around my shoulder, teeth sinking deep into my flesh. I snarled, grabbing a fistful of fur, and yanked it off me. It tried to twist away, but I tightened my grip and drove my knee into its ribs, feeling the bones snap beneath the blow. It yelped, more animal than man, and I drove my hand into its mouth, grabbing hold of its tongue. With a vicious pull, I tore it free, letting the blood spray across my face. The others hesitated. I could see it in their eyes, the uncertainty, the fear. They weren't used to prey fighting back. They had expected to find a monster, but they hadn't expected one that fought like this. I picked up the twitching, half-dead corpse of the werewolf at my feet and swung it in a wide arc, feeling the bones in its neck snap as it collided with another wolf's head. The force of the impact sent them both sprawling, their bodies tangled together in a heap of broken limbs and fur. I dropped the corpse, its blood pooling around my boots, and stepped over it, stalking toward the others. And then he appeared. The Alpha. He was larger than the rest, his fur a deep, dark black that absorbed the moonlight. His eyes glowed a fierce, burning red, and when he bared his teeth, I saw that they were sharp enough to cut steel. He moved with a slow, deliberate grace, the kind that spoke of a creature who had never known fear, who had never known defeat. I wiped the blood from my mouth and met his gaze. "Finally," I muttered, my voice dripping with anticipation. "A challenge." He charged faster than the others, a blur of fur and claws. I barely had time to react before he was on me, his claws tearing through my chest, leaving deep, ragged gashes. The pain flared white-hot, but it only served to sharpen my focus. I grabbed his wrist, feeling the bones shift beneath my grip, and twisted, but he yanked free, his claws raking across my face. The force of the blow sent me stumbling back, blood pouring from the fresh wounds. I could feel it, his power, his strength. This one was different. This one was a real threat. Good. He lunged again, and I met him head-on, our bodies colliding with a force that shook the ground. I drove my fist into his ribs, felt the bones crack, but he retaliated, his claws digging into my side, tearing through flesh and muscle. I snarled, grabbing a fistful of his fur, and wrenched him to the ground. But he twisted, using his legs to kick me off. I landed on my feet, chest heaving, my blood mixing with his in the dirt. The other wolves had backed away, forming a wide circle around us, their eyes fixed on the battle. This was no longer about them. It was about him and me. The alpha bared his teeth, his eyes flashing. "You think you can kill me?" he growled, his voice deep, rumbling like thunder. I grinned, blood dripping from my lips. "I've killed kings," I growled. You're just another beast." He roared, and we clashed again, our bodies locked in a brutal, bloody embrace. I drove my knee into his stomach, feeling the breath rush out of him, but he retaliated, his claws digging into my shoulders, pinning me to the ground. He lunged for my throat, but I grabbed his head, fingers digging into his eyes, and twisted with all my strength. He howled, jerking back, blood pouring from his ruined eye socket. He stumbled, but he wasn't finished. Neither was I. We stood there, facing each other, bloodied, broken, but unyielding. And I knew, as I looked into his one remaining eye, that this battle was far from over. The alpha's eyes were still burning into mine, even as blood seeped from the wounds he had carved into my flesh. His fangs were bared, dripping with my blood, but I wasn't ready to let him have the satisfaction of seeing me fall. I would see him broken first. The other werewolves circled around us, waiting for the moment when their leader would deliver the killing blow. I could see the hunger in their eyes, the desperate need to witness their alpha's triumph, to watch him tear my heart from my chest. They believed this was their moment. How wrong they were. The alpha lunged, his claws extended, aiming for my throat. I twisted, grabbing his wrist mid-swipe, and drove my knee into his ribs. The bones cracked beneath the impact, and for the first time, I saw hesitation in those glowing red eyes. I used that hesitation. I twisted his arm with a force that would have torn it from its socket had he been anything less than what he was. He howled in pain, the sound echoing through the forest, but before I could capitalize on it, two of his packmates crashed into me. From the side, their claws raking across my back, tearing into my flesh. I stumbled forward, falling to one knee, blood pouring from the fresh wounds. The pain was blinding, but I welcomed it, let it sharpen my focus. I wouldn't be brought down by mutts. The werewolves leaped on me, snarling and snapping, and I felt their teeth sink into my shoulder, their claws tearing into my sides. They thought they had me pinned. I wrapped my arm around the one gnawing on my shoulder and squeezed, feeling the bones snap beneath my grip. It whimpered, trying to pull away, but I yanked it forward and slammed my head into its snout. The crunch of bone was satisfying, and I twisted its neck until it hung limp, blood pouring from its mouth. The second one, still clawing at my back, barely had time to react before I grabbed it by the leg, pulled it over my shoulder, and slammed it into the ground. It writhed, gasping for breath, and I stomped on its chest, feeling the ribs cave beneath my heel, each bone snapping like dry twigs. It convulsed, blood pouring from its mouth as it let out a pitiful whine, and I stomped again, crushing its heart beneath my foot. I stood there for a moment, breathing hard, my vision tinged with red. But there was no time to rest. Another wolf leaped at me, aiming for my throat, and I caught it mid-air by the head, twisting until its spine snapped. I tossed the corpse aside and turned to face the others. I could see it now. the fear. They had thought this would be easy. They had thought their numbers would be enough. But they had underestimated me, as so many others had before. "Is this all you have?" I snarled, baring my fangs. "Is this the best your kind can do?" They hesitated, exchanging nervous glances. But the Alpha let out a furious roar, and they surged forward again. The first one to reach me was smaller, faster, and I let it get close, let it feel the thrill of its impending kill. And then I grabbed its outstretched arm, yanked it forward, and drove my fist through its chest. My fingers wrapped around its heart, still beating, still pulsing, and I tore it free, watching as the light faded from its eyes. I threw the heart at another wolf, hitting it square in the face, and lunged forward, slashing my claws across its throat. It stumbled back, gurgling as blood sprayed from the wound, and I grabbed it by the jaw, tearing its head free with a savage twist. Another wolf tried to tackle me from the side, but I spun, grabbing it by the tail, and swung it around, slamming it into a tree with enough force to split the trunk. The creature crumpled to the ground, twitching, and I brought my foot down on its head, feeling the skull collapse beneath my weight. But even as I killed them, they kept coming, and I welcomed it. I was drenched in blood, my wounds burning, my muscles screaming. But I could feel the power coursing through me, the thrill of the hunt. This was what I was made for. And then, as I stood there amidst the carnage, I felt it. A massive force crashing into me, driving me back. The Alpha had returned, and this time, he wasn't holding back. He drove me into the ground, his claws tearing into my chest, shredding muscle and sinew. I felt the bones in my ribs crack, felt the air rush from my lungs. But I didn't let him see the pain. I grabbed him by the throat, digging my claws into his flesh, and twisted, rolling us over until I was on top, pinning him to the ground. "You will not win," I hissed, my voice low, dangerous. He snarled, his claws slashing across my face, leaving deep, ragged furrows. But I didn't flinch. I drove my elbow into his snout, hearing the crunch of bone, and slammed his head into the dirt. He struggled, his muscles bulging, his eyes blazing with fury, but I tightened my grip, feeling the bones in his neck begin to give. And then, just as I was about to deliver the final blow, another wolf crashed into me from the side, tearing me away from the Alpha. I hit the ground hard, my vision swimming, and felt the beast's jaws clamp down on my arm, teeth sinking deep into my flesh. I could feel the bone creak, feel the blood running hot and fast, but I didn't hesitate. I grabbed the wolf by the snout and twisted, feeling the jaw break beneath my fingers. It let out a pained yelp, and I yanked it forward, slamming its head into the ground until the skull cracked, leaving a dark pool of blood beneath it. I pushed myself to my feet, breathing hard, blood pouring from my wounds, but I met the Alpha's gaze with a grin. "Still not enough," I growled, wiping the blood from my mouth. The Alpha bared his fangs, muscles rippling beneath his fur, and lunged at me one final time, but I was ready. I sidestepped, grabbing him by the arm, and with a roar, I twisted, feeling the bones snap beneath my grip. He howled in pain, falling to one knee, and I drove my fist into his ribs, shattering them one by one. He fell back, gasping, his body twitching, and I stood over him, panting, covered in blood. "You're not ready," I whispered, leaning down to look into his eyes. "Not yet." I released him, watching as he stumbled to his feet, clutching his broken arm, eyes blazing with hatred and pain. He took one last look at me, and with a snarl, he turned, vanishing into the darkness, leaving his pack to their fate. The remaining wolves fled, tails tucked between their legs, and I watched them go, feeling the blood trickling down my skin, feeling the burn of my wounds. This was far from over. I could feel it in the air, the promise of another battle, the taste of blood yet to be spilled, and I would be ready. The moon hung high above us, bathing the forest in a cold, pale light. It illuminated the blood-stained earth, the broken bodies of the fallen, and the trail of crimson that marked the Alpha's desperate retreat. I could hear his ragged breathing, the pounding of his heart, frantic and uneven. He was hurt, bleeding, but still running. Still clinging to the hope that he could escape what was coming. He couldn't. I followed him through the trees, moving silently, my eyes locked on the trail of blood that led deeper into the forest. He had been fast before, frighteningly so, but now his strength was waning. The wounds I'd inflicted on him had slowed him down, and with each passing moment, his scent grew thicker with the tang of fear. Good. I wanted him to be afraid. I wanted him to know that he had no hope, no chance of surviving this night. The alpha stumbled into a clearing, collapsing against a large, ancient tree, his chest heaving with every strained breath. His fur was matted with blood, his left arm hanging limp and useless at his side, and one of his eyes had swollen shut from where I'd crushed his face against the ground. But still, he tried to rise, to face me, as if he could somehow salvage his pride. Pathetic. You should have stayed hidden, I said, stepping into the clearing. You should have known better than to challenge me. He snarled, baring his fangs, but there was no strength behind it. He took a step forward, only to stumble, collapsing to one knee. The look of hatred in his one good eye was all that kept him standing. You'll die. He spat, blood dripping from his lips. I chuckled, low and mocking. Perhaps, I mused, taking a step closer. But not tonight. Before he could react, I lunged, my hand closing around his throat. I lifted him effortlessly, his feet dangling inches above the ground, and drove him into the tree with enough force to shake the branches. He choked, claws scrabbling at my arm, but I tightened my grip, feeling the bones in his neck begin to crack. You've caused me quite a bit of trouble, you know, I said, tilting my head as I studied him. You thought you could kill me. You thought you could take my life, my territory. I leaned in, my lips brushing against his ear. But now, you're going to die. I released his throat, only to grab him by the arm, the one that still had some strength left in it. I twisted, feeling the tendons stretch, feeling the joint resist, and then I pulled. The sound of the bone dislocating was like music, a sharp, wet pop that made him scream. It wasn't enough. I pulled harder, yanking the arm clean from his body, blood spraying in a wide arc, coating the ground, the tree, my face. He screamed, a high, desperate sound that echoed through the forest, but I wasn't finished. I took the severed limb and brought it down on his head, feeling the bone shatter, watching as his skull caved inward. He staggered, half blinded by the blood that poured down his face, but still. He tried to fight back, claws slashing wildly. Pathetic. I sidestepped his feeble attack, grabbed him by the fur on his chest, and drove my knee into his stomach with enough force to lift him off the ground. He gagged, blood spraying from his mouth. And I did it again and again, until I felt something inside him rupture. His body convulsed, and I let him fall to the ground, watching as he tried to crawl away, his movements slow and jerky. Is this it? I taunted, stalking after him. Is this all the great Alpha has to offer? He whimpered, the sound more animal than man, and I grabbed him by the leg, dragging him back toward me. His claws dug into the dirt, leaving long furrows in the earth, but it did nothing to slow me down. I rolled him onto his back, straddling his chest, and looked down at him, savoring the terror in his eyes. You should have run when you had the chance, I whispered. The moon watched like an indifferent god as I stood over the Alpha's broken form, his blood staining the earth, mingling with mine. He had fought, struggled, and failed. Now, all that remained was to take what was mine. He was barely conscious, his breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps, each one laced with the scent of blood. His eyes, still burning with that stubborn fire, flickered weakly as they tried to focus on me. Pathetic. Even now, he clung to the last threads of life, as if it would somehow save him. I leaned in close, my fingers still wrapped around his ruined heart, the blood dripping from my hand in slow, steady rivulets. You wanted this, I murmured, my voice low, soft, the kind of whisper that death brings. You wanted to face me, to kill me, to claim my throne. He tried to snarl, but it was nothing more than a wet, gurgling cough. Blood flecked his lips, his body twitching beneath me. There was no defiance left in him, only the faint, desperate spark of a dying beast. I could feel his life slipping away, could hear the faint, erratic thumping of his heart, each beat weaker than the last. I tightened my grip, feeling the warm, slick muscle pulse against my palm, and then leaned down, my fangs grazing the skin of his neck. "No," he choked out, the word barely more than a whisper. It made me smile. "Yes," I replied, and sank my teeth into his throat. The taste was electric, raw and primal, and it exploded across my tongue in waves of power. I drank deeply, greedily, feeling his life flood into me, feeling the strength of his blood course through my veins. It was hot, intoxicating, and I could feel his fear mingling with the taste, could feel his heart stuttering as I drained him dry. He convulsed beneath me, his claws raking weakly at my back, but there was no strength left in him. I could feel him weakening, feel the life ebbing from his veins, and I drank deeper, pulling every drop of power, every ounce of strength from his dying body. His blood was rich, saturated with centuries of violence, and with every gulp, I felt my wounds knitting themselves together, felt my strength returning tenfold. He tried to fight, tried to push me away, but I pinned him down, my hands digging into his flesh, holding him still as I drank, as I fed, as I devoured everything that he was. His blood surged into me, and I felt the power in every drop. Felt his spirit break beneath my fangs. His heart, still beating weakly in my grasp, gave one final flutter, and then it stopped. I pulled away, my lips coated in his blood, my fangs bared in a grin that felt more like a snarl. His body twitched once, twice, and then fell limp, his eyes staring sightlessly into the night sky. I watched him for a moment, feeling the power surge through me, feeling his strength become mine. I felt invincible, unstoppable, and the blood that coursed through my veins burned like fire, setting every nerve alight. I stood, the corpse of the Alpha crumbling at my feet, drained of every last drop. He was nothing now, just a broken, empty shell. I let his heart fall to the ground, stepping back as I watched his body dissolve into the dirt, nothing more than another forgotten ghost beneath the moonlight. I licked the blood from my lips, savoring the taste, the power, and let out a low, satisfied sigh. "Now," I whispered, my voice carrying through the stillness, "you are mine." The forest was silent, the night air thick with the scent of death, and I could feel the eyes of the remaining werewolves watching from the shadows, their fear palpable, their hatred simmering. I didn't bother looking for them. They weren't worth my time. They would never be worth my time. I turned my back on the carnage, walking away from the ruined, blood-soaked clearing, leaving the remains of the Alpha and his pack to rot beneath the moon. This was my land now, and any who dared challenge me would meet the same fate. I could still taste the Alpha's blood on my tongue, could feel his power thrumming in my veins, and I knew, as I disappeared into the shadows, that this was only the beginning. Let them come. Let them try to take what is mine. I am eternal, and I am hungry.